Okay, so the Greeks and the mercantilists then bring us to kind of the moments before capitalism really starts to take hold, along with the Industrial Revolution. And it's really, for the most part, the physiocrats that were a group of quite influential French economists that come before Adam Smith. Adam Smith was, as we'll learn in the next lecture, Adam Smith as a child was trained by a physiocrat and went to, spent a good deal of time in France, basically reconstructing physiocratic ideas and repackaging them into classical economics. So it's obviously this kind of just becomes the set of theorists that get us right to Adam Smith. But before we get to the physiocrats, we get a pretty important economist, and that would be Sir William Petty, who is basically 17th century, so about 1620s to about almost 1690. And the reason why he was an important economist is that he really started this work of building tables and charts. He did a quantitative method that we know as political arithmetic. And his idea was that we need to separate out the morals of people from the sciences, and that the sciences are basically a means to an end. And that in conducting this political arithmetic, that what we see is that we're going to focus a great deal of our time on questions that surround money and value. So remember, the mercantilists didn't really have to deal with these kinds of things because they just focused on gold and silver. But William Petty, who's kind of the precursor to the physiocrats, what he did is he wanted to understand what the value of money was. And what's really cool and kind of carries forward to today is that what he started to do is understand that the value of money comes from how much money is being supplied and how much demand there is for it. And not really getting a strict value of that money, but then you have to then look at what is it that gives us the demand for any certain currency. And that one of the biggest things that makes us want a certain currency or not would be, is it used as the medium of exchange? Meaning, is it relied upon by others to buy goods and services? So, with this focus on this kind of political arithmetic and the things that come about from trying to find a value to money, what he ended up doing is spending a good deal of time on trying to measure a single factor called productive power, which is supposed to give kind of a standard of value to everything being produced, that everything being produced could be understood in terms of its productive power. But Sir William Petty didn't, he passed away before he could kind of go any further with that study. But what it did as well is it gave us the physiocrats. And probably one of the most well-known physiocrats isn't the three economists that are here on this slide, but rather the Irish-born economist Richard Cantillon, who lived in France and became the influencer of these three. So you've got Petty, Sir William Petty, and Richard Cantillon being kind of the theoretical foundation for these three physiocrats. And what made Richard Cantillon as kind of the influencer of the physiocrats was his focus on the pursuit of profit, and that this pursuit of profit basically helps an economy achieve some form of equilibrium, and that that pursuit of profit can be understood as can be measured in terms of the market price. And that becomes, Richard Cantillon gives us kind of our first earliest notions of a price, and gives us our first notion then for what does the entrepreneur do. That the entrepreneur is the person who emerges to take on risk, to participate in markets, and to compete. And that entrepreneur, yes, they are personally and privately profiting, but that they're also giving rise to just a stronger economy in general. And from that, again, we get this. We get these three economists, Quesnay, Demours, and Mirabeau, as the first group of economists, these physiocrats, who are going to emphasize natural law and the importance of agriculture. Quesnay is the leader of this group. He's the most important of the physiocrats. Very much in favor of the monarchy. But at the same time, he did promote individual rights and private property. And he also does give us the circular flow diagram, which, when you take principles, is one of the things that's typically covered in chapter 1, where we understand how money and goods and services flow between individuals and businesses. And with these physiocrats, even though it's a rather short period of time, 16 years, this is our transition to Adam Smith. Because what does Adam Smith focus on? Adam Smith focuses on these same things of the price, the creation of wealth through the actions of the entrepreneur. And what Quesnay and the other economists among the physiocrats focus on is this tableau économique. So let's just, we'll get to that tableau here in a few slides. So again, here's our Quesnay, the leader of the physiocrats, again, very much in favor of the monarchy. No surprise, he's the personal physician to King Louis. What we see with Quesnay and this idea that agriculture was important stands opposed to Britain, which is industrializing heavily, and Britain is much farther ahead in being a pure capitalist society than France. France was changing, and essentially what Quesnay and his fellow physiocrats were doing was they were trying to help France change, modernize, and become more capitalistic. And in doing so, they were going to be able to save the monarchy and strengthen it. And what Quesnay and the other physiocrats saw as important was the production of real things, real outputs like agricultural goods, and not necessarily just production of gold and silver, but the production of actual things. and that itself was the source of wealth. That compared to agriculture, manufacturing isn't as important because in some sense it's sterile, meaning that people are working with manufacturing, they're working maybe more with machines in kind of an automation process that makes it less human. But also France and the physiocrats were also quite interested in lifting mercantilist restrictions, making the market even more capitalist and free of government intervention. Now, this all gives rise to this tableau économique of Quesnay, and it's probably his most famous famous text. It's a general equilibrium model. It's what again we see if you look at any. Well, actually, let's just look at it this way. Why don't we just? If we just look at, you see this again typically in chapter 1 or chapter 2 of a textbook. I'm just going to click on images here. But you tend to see in your Principles of Economics textbook today, this kind of circular flow diagram where households sell their labor, their capital, their land and entrepreneurship to businesses who in turn give money to households, and they take that money and give it to businesses to get products. This is a Quesnay and a physiocrat innovation that remains today. And it's no surprise that the circular flow diagram is much for him, much like the circulation of blood, which was only about 100 years old at the time. And we can understand this, that good circulation basically makes the body healthier. Well, good circulation, meaning the freer flow of goods, also makes the economy more healthy. And so in some sense, the economy embodies the human body, the human species. Now, there are some assumptions in this tableau économique, and one of those assumptions is that we don't have any international trade. So the economy is closed. We also have completely free competition, meaning that there's no regulation, no control for things like externalities. Again, there's a focus on agricultural production, and that agricultural production is coming from wage laborers. And that essentially society is organized as having three classes. Landlords, basically the moneyed class, the manufacturing, which is sterile, and then the true productive part of the economy being agricultural. And that any surpluses that emerge are coming from the agricultural class within the economy. And so this is from the tableau économique itself. I mean, look at this. What you're seeing here is this idea that everything that is produced, anything that is, obviously the original version is in French, but anything that exists is split up. And basically you can trace value in the economy through all of its various steps. I mean, again, if you look at this here, just as the body consists of different organs that are all working for the common goal of the human body being able to exist, this is the way that we trace out the flow of things in the economy. And we can understand that economy as having three pillars. Those three pillars being, again, the landlords, the manufacturing, and the agricultural class. This agricultural class, again, is producing our surplus, which then allows our economy to grow bigger. That the money that exists, the money that we got to talk about with the mercantilist and Richard Cantillon, gives us this medium of exchange, and it allows that money that exists and becomes even greater to be able to finance agriculture in the next segment of time. And then what we get from Groenewegen and Vaggi is this idea from Quesnay that what we need to do is we need to separate or distinguish between the market price and the fundamental price. That the market price is determined by the market, is your day-to-day price, but that price itself can deviate from the value. That value is in some sense the fundamental price. That becomes important, especially for Karl Marx, as we'll see, right? Is that the price, that the fundamental price is this physiocratic idea that there's an underlying value to things, and that it might have no or it might have very little relationship to what the market determines the price to be. And that what you can do to determine this fundamental price is determine the value from the productive sector, the agricultural sector, and the sterile sector, the manufacturing sector. And that what we can then see is that the wages that come from everything, and the value of the raw materials, the natural resources, the capital, and the fact that that capital gets worn out, with then a payment needing to be made to landlords, that we can take all these values together and get a fundamental value, which again can be different than the market price. And that market price comes into two forms. One, that's the price sold by the seller. So that would be what we would consider today to be the wholesale price. And that will differ from the buyer's price, the price that the consumers pay for. That in essence, there's going to be a markup. Or instead of understanding it as a markup from a buyer, from a seller to a buyer, we could understand that as profit. Now, what Quesnay becomes concerned about is the fact that that farmers aren't being encouraged to make a great deal of investments for the long term in capital that would make their agriculture and even their manufacturing more productive. That these fundamental values are higher in England, so that there's more of an incentive in England to make these long-term investments in capital. And what you get from this is this really interesting idea of the bon prix. And that the bon prix is basically this price that would promote capital investment in agriculture, new manufacturing techniques, and large-scale production. That there's a special price, a good price, that would guarantee these profits and allow for this capital investment to occur. To be able to get that bon prix, what you need is the free trade of corn. And so Quesnay was really concerned with doing away with these corn laws, which had restricted the export of corn. And it's from Quesnay that we actually get the concept of the laissez-faire, which is popularized by Adam Smith. And laissez-faire essentially means hands-off, which would mean basically that the government takes a hands-off approach in the operation of the economy. And so the physiocrats, and then later Adam Smith, get us this really extreme version of capitalism, where capitalists and essentially companies can do whatever they can do whatever they want, um, with very little restrictions imposed by the government. Perhaps only one of the only restrictions would be usury, which again means charging incredibly high prices that could high interest prices, which would obviously discourage capital accumulation. So this capital accumulation is incredibly important. And also having a limited government is important for being able to have incredibly low taxes, which would again would encourage productivity within the agricultural sector. And then you get Turgot. And Turgot becomes important. He becomes associated with the physiocrats. And the reason why he's important is because as an administrator, he's the person that can put as a policy the practices of the physiocrats. So he actualizes the theories of the physiocrats. He, as Minister of Finance, he does get a great deal of the removal of the corn laws. And also, Turgot did believe that manufacturing was important and that we shouldn't think of it as sterile or less than agricultural products. But as Minister of Finance, he was forced out. And a lot of that came from his idea to put taxes on landlords. And obviously the landlords didn't like that. And so they persuaded King Louis to remove him as the Minister of Finance. And Turgot writes this book, Reflections on the Formation and Distribution of the Riches, in 1769, which was read by Adam Smith. And not only did Adam Smith read this Reflections text, but he actually translated it from its original French into English. And so what you can now understand with our first formal lecture now starting with Adam Smith is that a lot of that is just the combination then of Turgot and the popularization of Turgot. When Adam Smith writes Wealth of Nations, why is it that some countries are rich and others are poor? How's that any different than this title of Turgot's, Reflections on the Formation and Distribution of the Riches? It's not that different. And so here we have this really interesting quote then for Turgot and the importance that he placed on the accumulation of capital for the growth of an economy. Now, again, I'm going to let you read the quote himself. But his idea was that it's okay to take to lend money at interest for interest, the charge of interest, right? And that this is justified because it in some sense is trading, right? In this sense, it's trading, being able to use money now for being able to have more money later. And this idea of a strong capital market that exists because of interest is what's going to give rise to the accumulation of capital. Now, how is it then, now this isn't on the slides here, but how is it then that Adam Smith is not just another physiocrat, just a British one? Well, the reason why Adam Smith is just influenced by the physiocrat, but is not a physiocrat himself, is that Adam Smith really did largely think that the physiocrats were a bit too extreme. that again, just like Turgot, that manufacturing shouldn't be seen as sterile. And again, because because the physiocrats still did believe that taking interest was a bad thing, like Turgot, Adam Smith believed that the only way you're going to be able to get capital accumulation, which allows the economy to grow, is if you allow interest to exist. Okay, so these first lectures, the one on the Greek, the one on the mercantilist, and the one on the physiocrats, were each rather short lectures, about 15 to 20 minutes each. But my whole goal in doing those three, even though I didn't ask you to read chapters 2, 3, and 4, was just to give you an idea that now when we formally start this course with Adam Smith, that you shouldn't think of Adam Smith as this, I don't know, genius that comes up with the theories all on his own out of nowhere. Again, if anything, that's what history of economic thought does. It shows this kind of slow progression of theories, this refinement of theories that gets us to Adam Smith. But Adam Smith, again, is going to have a different set of theories, largely because the culture even that he exists in, industrialized, manufacturing-centric Britain, is very different than the agricultural-centric French culture. Okay.